CEO, a cruel millionaire, breaks down when he sees two boys taking care of a woman, finds out that they are his boys. Welcome, sweet souls. Color Stories. My name is James, and I hope this message finds you well. Let's say a beautiful prayer before we start. May peace and joy be with you. Fill your heart with love. May love guide your steps and your days be filled with lots of happiness and strength. Amen. Today I have something really special to tell you. I'd like to share with you a story written by my beloved wife, Selena. This is her. She's not only a great partner, but also a great writer. I'm excited to tell you my very first story, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. If you think there's something that could be better, please don't hesitate to let me know in the comments section. Your thanks will mean a lot to her and inspire her to keep writing, so let's click the subscribe button and let's dive into this lovely story together. Thanks for being here, Broad Westfield. It was the name that rang through every fancy office and gala, and every news story that said success, a guy with a huge presence, a strong chin, and cold blue eyes that warmed hearts but never melted his own, was the epitome of cold, cruel calculation, driven only by power. And he got rid of the word love from his language a long time ago because he thought it was a weakness. He lived his life based on numbers, deals, and power, not feelings. No one, not even his family, dared to ask him a question more than once. Broad gave in. That moment came from family pressure that not even money or power could stop. Plan. His royal mother, Eleanor, who was getting old, built half of what Broad now ruled that he had to marry her. You need an anchor, Broad, she told him, eyes sharp but soft. You need someone to remind you of love before your soul turns into ice all the way through. Sick of her persistence in seeing the business benefit of she asked him to marry her, and he agreed, but without any feelings involved. That's how Shanae came into Broad's life. Not as a lover, but as a name on a contract and a pretty face at a wedding. Made to look good, Shanae, a woman whose glow was like honey in the sun's sunlight, whose brown, smooth skin sparkled with a richness that made her stand out. Her long, soft hair her straight hair fell over her shoulders like black satin, and her big, expressive eyes held a huge amount of dreams, kindness, and quiet strength. She wasn't born rich, but from grace and with hope in her heart, she agreed to get married. The wedding was fancy, expensive, and pointless. There were cameras and cheers from the guests, but the groom never smiled. Broad stood at the altar like a figure made of cold marble, putting out his hand but never his heart. Shanae was worried, but she kept her head up and wore a soft smile that barely showed. Hid the pain inside. She thought that maybe, just maybe, she could melt the ice inside. Maybe her kindness would reach him. But as soon as the ceremony was over and the mansion's doors shut, Broad knew this wasn't love, was an exchange. In the days that followed, the house turned into a fancy jail. Broad was not there, and he was far away. For hours or days, sometimes coming home alone. He never looked at her. In the eyes, never wished to touch her hand, and never asked how her day was. Shanae tried so hard. She made breakfast every morning and tried to meet people. His soft touch when he got home, and put fresh flowers in the living room to bring life into the cold house. But no matter how hard she tried, people ignored her and finally shut her up. Was just something to decorate his house with, a part to play when the cameras came out, a name to talk about at business events. The Broad that everyone loved was well-groomed and calm. Being Broad at home was as cold as steel, and Shanae slowly and painfully understood that the man she had hoped to fall in love with couldn't love someone like her. It wasn't that she wasn't pretty or anything, charm, but he wouldn't feel it. Then, like a storm building up behind the scenes, the abuse got worse. At first, it was his abrupt, rude, and dismissive tone. It was his joke that she wasn't needed, and her smiles were acts of Shanae, who had a strong will, tried hard not to cry out of hopelessness. But at night, Broad never slept in the big bedroom next to her, so she was alone with the pillows. She soaked up her pain in silence and thought about what she had done wrong and why. Thought about whether this was the way she had to live from now on. When they were only 4 weeks married, Broad came home late one night. The truth hit them like a ton of glass. Smelling like a perfume that wasn't hers, His lips curled as he walked by her. "I'm done pretending," he said with a mean grin. "You served your goal. Now don't expect me to be your husband." Shanae's heart stopped. She shook her hands around the wine glass she had poured for him as she hoped to meet someone else who wouldn't look at her. "I see someone with those innocent, hopeful eyes who knows this is all a trick." "Broad, you can't mean this," I told her as she stood there frozen. Her whole soul broke. "Hand, write down your words. This deal is over. You can leave whenever you want." He then went into his room without feeling sorry or guilty. All that was heard was the sound of his voice. A door that shut felt like the lid of a coffin. That night, Shanae packed her up. Things with tears in their eyes, not fashion jewelry or clothes. She thought about the months she had tried her best to live, and the heart that had to put itself back together. One last time she stood in the doorway of the palace and looked back at the house she never belonged to. She whispered, "You'll regret it. Not because I'll make you, but because you'll know how much I love you." "Threw away," she said as she left, but she was having a terrible time inside. After a few weeks, Shanae moved into a small studio room in a less busy area of the city. The paint was chipped and the walls were thin, but it was hers. Much, but she was free. She got a job as a receptionist at a small law firm. Firm, not flashy, but honest. She began putting her life back together, fragile piece by fragile piece. Then one morning, everything changed. Dizzy for a few days, her eating was off, and her moods were all over the place. She felt sick out of the blue, and her breath caught in fear. A quick trip to the drugstore, a test that she did in her small bathroom while her hands were shaking. Shanae looked at the pregnancy test she was holding while sitting on, as her heart beat against her ribs on the edge of her bathtub. Tears came to her eyes. "I'm pregnant," she said with wide eyes that didn't come from fear but from shock. She said in a whisper, "Broad's child is inside me." She put her hands on her flat stomach. She couldn't help but cry, and for the first time in weeks they weren't tears of sadness. Something more, a reason for living. She considered going to court and asking for giving Broad the right to make money and feel good about it as well. As the days went by, she looked at her empty bank account and knew she didn't have the money to pay the lawyer's fees. And she really didn't want her child to be used as a pawn in a fight over egos. Broad's world was dangerous, cold, and heartless. This child earned this gift. "I don't need his money, and I don't need him," she told herself out loud. "I will do this," she said to herself as she lay in bed that night with her hand on her stomach. "For you and for us." She gave the little beating inside a name, her hope long before she knew there were two of them. As the months went by, Shanae worked, harder than ever. At first, she hid her growing belly under big coats until her boss gave her a promotion. The women in the office started to help her more, and the owner of when she worked late, the small diner across the street gave her free soup. She walked everywhere and saved all of her money, read every pregnancy book she could get her hands on, and talked to her future child like they were old friends. When the time came, after 9 months of hard work, swelling feet, painful nights, and silence prayers, Shaw didn't have one boy but two twins with the same soft, pale skin. She has brown hair and the most beautiful trait of all, piercing blue eyes. She held them close and cried tears that made her soul feel better. "You are my," she whispered to the boys. "No matter what your dad was, you are." They were pure. "You are mine, and I will give you the world," she said. Aiden's names are strong and full of history. She didn't start her life as a mother born again after being a wife abandoned. Her wedding may not have been love-filled, but she got the strongest love of all, the love of a mother for her child. Children, the hospital lights went out as midnight approached. Quite beeps and the soft beat of two tiny hearts lying peacefully in Shanae sat on her hospital bed with her legs propped up. Her body hurt. Even though her arms were still sore from hours of labor, she never took her eyes off the mattress. Aiden and Kylo's faces. Her fingers shook as she tucked the soft blanket in. The pain in her chest was dulled only by the steady rise and fall of their breath under their chins. The room was small, empty, and not very fancy, but to Shanae, it held the most valuable thing. A gift in the world. She had given birth and became a mother, and even her heart had been broken months ago. But tonight she felt like something new was taking its place. Not yet peace, but resolve. The nurse walked in for a short time and smiled softly as she did so, checked her vital signs and gave her a cup of warm water before leaving her alone. Shanae closed her eyes and leaned her head back against the hard pillow. The last things Broad spoke were still fresh in people's minds. Cruel, mean, and uncaring. Those words were no longer important. What was important now was the present. She had made this magic happen on her own, but the real world was still there. The walls of the hospital were there to greet her, not with warmth, but with pain. Apartment to go back to. The small studio she had been putting together for months, been taken away from her when she became pregnant and couldn't work double shifts. The owner hadn't waited. Her paycheck barely covered the hospital bills. Now she had 2 babies, a weak body, and nowhere to go. She didn't want to give up, but she hadn't made it through Broad's lack of interest in her before. The cold walls of his house held the tears she had shed alone in empty bedrooms, only to be broken now. Heartbreak had made her strong, and now it would be formed by love. Her phone, an old broken device that barely held a charge, lay nearby. She opened a blank screen next to her and started typing in the names of nearby women's. There were shelters and city services for her, so her pride didn't matter anymore. Safety, warmth, and food for them, not her. It was too soon for morning, and she had to carry her babies with heavy steps. A kind nurse had given her used onesies to dress them in, donated blood, and checked out of the hospital without a plan for where to go. The air was bitter, and the clouds were heavy with the promise of rain. She tightened her grip. She wrapped an old scarf around her chest tighter and put the thin baby carrier on top of it. Walked toward a nearby bus stop. This time she didn't cry. Carved enough lines down her face. Now all she had was, she walked with resolve and the weight of being a mother on her shoulders. The shelter was full, as was the second one. The third one had room, but only for a few nights. Shanae quietly agreed. A cot next to a drafty window. She held her kids all night and read them stories while they slept. She kept telling them stories about a future that would be different from the present. Each morning she pushed an old stroller that a worker gave her for miles. Given her going door to door looking for part-time work as a secretary, cleaning jobs. She was turned down many times, but her eyes never got tired. Every no made her want to find a yes even more. She got her food from food banks, diapers from donation boxes. One day, after almost 3 weeks of not being able to sleep, in cold showers, but her hard work paid off. A small law company tucked between a bookstore and a florist both put up a handmade sign that said, "Receptionist needed." Start right away, Shanae walked in with hope fluttering like a bird's feather, the woman behind the desk. She looked up with a smile and asked, "Experience?" She was middle-aged and had blue eyes. "Some," Shanae said while putting his torn resume on the bar. "But the woman worked hard and said, I can learn anything. I just need a chance." She looked at the baby carrier next to her for a long time before asking, "Twin boys?" Shanae agreed. "Beautiful names," the woman said as she looked at the handmade patches along Aiden and Kylo. There was a pause and then, "You start on Monday. The pay isn't great, but it's regular. And if you need it, you can ask for it. It's okay to bring them sometimes. We're a small team and believe in supporting each other." Shanae's knees almost gave out. Thankfulness poured out of him so deeply. She was so angry she could hardly breathe. "Thank you," she whispered as she held on to the paper. The woman gave her the information. "Thank you so much," Shanae said. That night in the shelter bed, she held her boys closer than ever and whispered, "I got us a job, babies." Cheeks. It's not much, but it's a start. Mom is going to make us a life. Again, I dreamed of a studio room with soft lighting and clean sheets. Tiny crib by the window where the sun would kiss her boys' faces in the morning. Job days were tough. She got up early and took a crowded bus with the twins, in tow dropped them off at a free daycare, and then smiled his way into the company. Even though her legs hurt, she took calls, sorted papers, got coffee, and not only did she learn how to file court papers, but her hands and feet were also badly hurt. She never missed a day and never whined about her pay, even though it was small, was part of her dream coming true. She saved everything she could. skipping meals when she had to, and making up clothes that were torn. Instead of getting new ones, she was proud of each diaper she bought on her own. The men at the firm people began to notice that new girl. One said to another, "She works harder than anyone else here." The office boss took her aside one Friday and a raise. Not a lot, but more than she had hoped for. "You're special, Shanae," he told her. "Keep going." And she did. Every night she kept track of her progress by pen and paper. Get your own room, save money for preschool, and start nursing school. Someday her dreams would come true. They were just waiting for the right time. In the rainy evening, she walked home with one twin asleep on her chest and the other softly humming against her shoulder as she walked by a window with news stories on it. Broad Westfield was shown on TV, shaking hands with a new woman and showing off his white teeth for the cameras. Eating up every second, her heart stopped beating fast. She stared for a moment, and then she looked away. She turned away. She had lost her last tear for him a long time ago. He was now a ghost. His name was no longer on the future, but there was a flicker of hate, but of justice. She wanted to sue him in court to get help for her kids, but the price was too high. Lawyers don't work for free. Broad had a lot of power over her, and she couldn't fight him because it would mean facing a mountain with her bare hands. She didn't need to be with her boys all the time, but she did look at them sometimes. She looked into her son's bright blue eyes, which were the same color as hers, and wondered if he'd ever look at them. Would he ever know the lives he left behind? Would he care? Would he break? But her commitment to raise you sucked up the questions. She told her kids one night as they slept on a borrowed mattress in a, "I will teach you love and respect in my friend's spare room. I will also show you that we need someone with power over people." The days turned into weeks. The company, she signed a new deal and took nighttime online classes to learn how to make baby clothes out of scraps, how to put two kids to sleep with just her voice. She was tired, but the fire inside her never went out. She watched the sunrise from a park bench one morning while she fed the birds. "This is what strength looks like," she told the boys with a soft smile. "It wasn't power or money," she said. "Just this being here, deciding to rise when everything tries to bring you down." The silent goodbye she said in her head as she left Broad's house that night, been her second chance at life. She didn't need praise or payback. What she was here to do had two little faces and two little hands that gripped her fingers, holding her firmly to a future that won't be bitter, but with love that could not be stopped or wavered. The sun broke through the thin curtains of the Shanae finally got the small studio apartment she had been saving for months, even though the floor creaked. The heater groaned with age, but it was hers and, more importantly, it was home. Because of her and the two wonders she held gently every morning and night, Aiden and Kylo, that's what she called them after holding each one for the first time 9 months after her world had ended. Been turned on their heads. The doctor had given her the first twin and softly gasped when they saw the porcelain white skin and ice blue eyes. That looked at her with interest. Shauna didn't need anyone to tell her where she was. Those traits came from. They were clear. Broad's heritage was written in stone across their little faces, in their chins, cheeks, and eyelashes. But she didn't move or cry. She just looked into those eyes and whispered. The second twin replied in the same airy way. "You are mine now, only mine." Glow a cry that shook the delivery room like a song that wanted to be heard. And Shanae knew right away that it was her. She saw babies as a gift, not as a mistake, a hardship, or a reminder of a betrayal. It was pure light that came from blackness and was meant to shine with love. She named the first one Aiden after a story her grandmother told her when she was a kid. Tell her about a brave soldier with a good heart, and then give Kylo a name. As a girl, one she had written about in her diaries before she knew it. Heartbreak. From that day on, every breath she took, every move she made, every tear she shed, and being a mother didn't wait for her to smile. It was sewn around them like steel. Be Ready told her to get up, which she did, but her eyes were blurry at 3 a.m. Liz hummed while feeding them and rocking them until their cries woke her up in the middle of the night. Her arms went numb, but every beat of her heart made it stronger. Her hands were dry and cracked from washing bottles and dishes in cold water. Her back hurt from carrying two babies through snowy streets to the small daycare 2 blocks from her office. Her spirit wouldn't bend. She learned the patterns of their cries like a holy language and knew which boy needed help, which liked to be soothed by music. She sang old R&B love songs. Songs turned into lullabies, and her voice was like silk in their dreams. Every laugh, every touch of her finger filled her chest with fire. There were no designer diapers or golden cribs, and there were no warm maids or chauffeurs. Rides, but they had warm nights, funny days, and more of it. Aiden loved looking at lights more than any house could hold. Kylo would hide his face in her neck and listen to her while she talked. It seemed like his heartbeat was his favorite song. She couldn't buy fancy toys, so she used socks to make puppets and paper and crayons to tell stories. The twins laughed so hard she thought no other kids had ever laughed so hard. Pure, deep-seated happiness that made the neighbors smile through paper-thin walls. Even though the heater in the flat had problems, the warmth between them never went away as they learned to crawl. Then crawled, then stumbled into her arms. Her heart grew bigger than anything else. They were taking shaky steps, but she knew it because her hug was firm, were mixed up, but she understood every word. When they finally said "Mama," she knew what they meant. She cried quietly while holding them close as if they were the only ones who could hear her. Things that were valuable in a world full of empty shine. The company where she worked had become like a second family to her. Co-workers loved the boys. When the babysitter called, she'd bring Aiden with her, and the boys, Kylo and her, would play with safe office behind her desk. Goods waving at customers and making hearts melt. The business partner once said, laughed. Those two are going to charm their way into court one day. Before she laughed, Shani said a prayer. Let them charm the world not with money, but with love, with the love she gave them every day. Warm milk and soft music on the old Bluetooth were always played before bed. A speaker she found at a thrift store played as she kissed him and whispered, I love you. Their foreheads were always turned from left to right. Aiden, then Kylo, said, You are not marked by your dad's silence, and she'd tell them, even though they didn't get it yet. You show that love doesn't need money to grow. You are love-made. It was true that strangers would often stop her on the street and look shocked by the, Are they yours? They'd ask in awe of the boy's beautiful eyes and mysterious charm. They're beautiful, they would say, and Shanae would smile and say, Yes, they're mine, all mine. Bro's name didn't fit in their story anymore. He was they would never meet a ghost, and their light would never be ruined by a shadow. She made their birthday cakes from scratch, cut their hair, and taught them how to say please and thank you before they could say their own names correctly. The living room was both a nursery and a playhouse, and the corners were full of co-workers gave her handmade cell phones and picture books as gifts on the weekends. Take them to the park. The sound of their laughter will fill the slides and swings, and her heart will burst every time they see their little faces. Her feet went back to her arms. The broken woman who had stood before her was no longer there. On the sidewalk outside of a hospital, not sure where to go. She was a mother, a fierce, glowing, unflappable mother, whose love changed every part of their lives. Aiden grew to try new things, always pulling Kylo toward the monkey bars, or laughing as he did so. Kylo, who was calmer and more aware, tried to catch mice and would watch Aiden with admire before following slowly, always keeping one eye on Shanae, and Shanae they watched them grow while cheering, laughing, and sometimes crying behind shades. They didn't have much, but they shared what they did have. They didn't have enough money, but they drowned in warmth, and every night as Shanae put them to bed under superhero blankets and watched their chests rise and fall in the sink. God that they had come into her life. They weren't a mistake. They were both gifts in disguise, but they also caused her a lot of pain. She often thought about what the future would hold for them. Is their father something they think about? Do they wonder why their life wasn't like other kids? She didn't know, but she would answer. With love, truth, and the strength of holding them close every night through storms outside and inside. She knew deep down that Aiden and Kylo would never feel alone and unwanted. They would never feel like they were not wanted. They would grow up with joy in their hearts. Kindness was carved into their hearts. They showed that pain could give life, that love could come from ashes, and that even when the world turned against it, Shanae didn't have the motherly arms that could hold the weight of the world. A fairy tale. But what she had was better. It was real, raw beauty, and it all started At that moment, two sets of blue eyes looked up at her and saw that she was home. It started out like any other day. The pot smelled like cereal, and the sound of little feet running quickly down the narrow hallway of their small flat. With one hand, Shanae flipped toast on the stove, and with the other, she zigged up Aiden's jacket. Her hair was tied back. As Kylo asked her to help him find his left shoe, she quickly put her hair up in a bun. She had been able to handle everything with ease for 5 years. The years had gone by so quickly, petals moving in the wind, soft and quiet, filled with the sound of small. They still lived simple lives, and their apartment was still cozy and old. But it was full of bright toys and the laughter of two growing boys who loved their mother so much. Shanae had grown. She is stronger in heart as well as body from carrying her twins every day. Her eyes were no longer filled with the sadness of deception. Instead, they sparkled with peace, victory. She had become their safe place, their home, and their savior. Every question was answered with time and love, and she would walk them. Every morning she rushed to daycare before going to work at the front desk of a dental office, where patients always smiled when they saw her because hers never went away, even when she was very tired. Every night she picked up the boys and kissed each one, cheek and stories to tell. They'd stop by the nearby food store on Fridays. They would help pick vegetables, and Kylo would always pick the smallest apples, and Aiden, acting like a cook to look over the tomatoes, didn't need much besides each other. But something was off. The wind picked up out of nowhere, and Shanae's chest hurt as they left the store with 2 bags. Her boys laughed behind her as she walked hand in hand down the path, only 3 blocks from her house. Shanae felt the world tilt a little as the sun played hide-and-seek behind clouds. She blinked to try to settle herself, thinking it was because she wasn't getting enough. But all of a sudden, a fierce heat and a sharp pain rose from her stomach, in the chest. She let out a gasp, stumbled forward, and then fell to her knees as the food bag fell all over the place. The concrete apples rolling away, her boys laughing, stopped right away. "Mommy," Aiden whispered as he walked up to Shanae. She tried to answer. When the mouth opened, a stream of blood hit the sidewalk. Kylo screamed, "Mama! Mommy!" His voice broke. With fear, Aiden fell next to her and tried to hold her up with his small arms while tears ran down his face. Some cars slowed down, but none of them stopped. People looked, but kept walking. Even when a mother passed out in front of her kids, the city moved quickly. Kylo reached into Chennai's. He reached into her bag and took out her phone. He desperately tried to unlock it with shaking hands, but his fingers messed up. The Aiden pleaded, "Please help us," as he hugged his mother tightly. Shanae found it hard to keep her eyes open as she saw her boys through a fog. "I'm okay, baby," she tried to say, but all that came out was blood. Then, as if fate had called for it, the roar of an engine cut through the moment a sleek black luxury car slammed into the curb a few feet away. The tires slid on the ground. The door flew open, and a tall man in a sharp dark suit rushed out of the room. His presence was intimidating, and for a moment even the chaos stopped as he ran to Sean's side and She looked at the 2 scared boys holding to her with blood on her lips. Without thinking, he knelt down, took off his coat, and carefully wrapped it around her shaking body. "Call 911, he yelled. Someone behind him, his driver, was already calling. "Hang on, ma'am," the man said. He told her in a deep, quiet voice, "You'll be fine. Stay with me." Shanae tried to focus on his face, but her vision was blurring like a dream just before dawn. "My babies," she whispered. She said, "Don't leave them alone." And he looked at the twins with a sad face. He looked at the driver with wide eyes and a scared look on his face. They were now in the car. The driver picked up the crying boys and reassured them in a soft voice. As the man easily took Shanae into his arms, being careful not to shock her weak body. His shirt was stained with blood, but he didn't wash it. Blink. In an instant, they were in the back seat, with Shanae's back resting on the leather. while her boys held her hands and whispered, "Mommy, do not leave us." The man yelled, "Take us to Mercy General and tell them to get ready for trauma now." As the car sped off, he pulled out his phone and called ahead. He spoke in a way that showed power and earnestness, which made it easy to get around red tape. "You're not dying," he told Shanae as he brushed her hair off her wet face. "Hey, do you hear that?" he asked under his breath. "You're not leaving these boys." But Shanae didn't answer. Had shut and her chest had barely raised. The boys sobbed softly, not realizing what was going on, of the stranger's name, but they did know that he had control of their lives. As the hospital became clear, it was like seeing a lantern in the dark. Nurses rushed out with a drink, and Chennai was man yelling orders like he owned the place was wheeled inside. And maybe he did. As Aiden and Kylo watched the doors close behind them, they were wrapped in blankets and clung to each other. "Your mommy is strong," the man said quietly as he kneeled down in front of them. "Do you get it? She's going to fight." The boys agreed. Their eyes showed fear that no child should know. Hour after hour, the man stayed seated with them, got them food from the vending machine, and helped them clean their hands of blood. But they still didn't. They didn't ask who he was. They were only thinking about her. Woman who sang them to sleep and kissed their scraped knees. And somewhere in the hallway of the hospital was quiet as monitors beeped and doctors moved behind it. Behind closed doors, the stranger leaned back in the plastic chair and looked through the looking out the window at the storm clouds coming in above. Something about the boys had scared him. Eyes in their names, but he pushed the thought out of his mind. He was just stopping by. Told a stranger who stopped to help him, but fate had its own plans. Script and the storm outside the hospital had only just started. The clouds got thicker, and low-level thunder sounded like a message from heaven. But Broad Warner couldn't hear anything. He just stood there in the hallway and stared through the glass door into the emergency room. Shanae was asleep while being hooked up to tools that beeped and blinked like thin threads of life barely hold her to this world. His mind is generally very sharp, and planning was now a blur of shock. It was the first time in years his heart beat fast and irregularly, and Broad hadn't come to see him. This part of the city for years. It was too normal and too far from the fancy. His home was in a glass tower, but fate brought him here today, and now he was. He was frozen and had to face a ghost from the past that he had buried under his desire. Pride. He kept looking at the two little boys curled up in the waiting chairs, one with his head on their shoulders with rough hospital blankets. And those eyes that were too clear to be real, shocked him with their sharp, cold points. Not because they were strange, but because they were. They looked just like him. They were pale-skinned reflections of his younger self. He often saw the same intensity in himself when he looked in the mirror before a boardroom fight. At first he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him because of the stress of finding Chennai in such a bad way or the lack of sleep. He thought his state had messed up his thoughts, but the similarities were clear. He couldn't believe those boys were his real children, but he had never met them, seen them before right now. His jaw tightened like 1,000 memories came flooding back. Hit him in the chest and slammed into him like a wave of violence, her voice shaking. At the wedding, the soft touch of her hand on his as they said their vows he hadn't meant. The cold look in her eyes the night he walked away. He went out with another woman because he thought it was what he needed, because he thought love wasn't for guys like him. That's when business came up. He remembered the tear that was running down her face as he shut the door. That door behind him. He remembered how quiet it was after she said goodbye softly. He told himself that she would find someone else and move on, because she was better off without a guy like him. She felt safe with her, but now seeing her pale and weak on that hospital bed, he realized he had done it while she was out of breath, and blood was still on the corner of her lips. He had broken her heart and left her when she needed him the most. And those boys, those sweet, innocent boys, he hadn't just left her. He had left. Them too, growing up without his name, presence for them to protect himself. The truth hit him like a sledgehammer. He reached up to take off his tie, but his hands were shaking. Warner never shook, not in billion-dollar deals, not fights in court, but now standing here with a seeing the past through two small sets of blue eyes. He thought it was behind him. He was falling apart. The boys looked at him, looked up at him for a moment, their faces showing interest and confusion. Lightly pulled Aiden's sleeve. "That's the man who helped Mommy," he said in a whisper. Aiden nodded, but neither he nor Broad said a word to him. They didn't know him, so why would they? Was a stranger, even to his own kids. The shame of it almost broke him. He was being watched by a nurse who asked them kindly if they had a guardian. He should have been that guardian when he heard that word. They should have known. He should have been there when they were born. He should have kissed their heads and held Chenny's hand through it all. He had been busy instead chasing money and power while the woman who used to wear his ring was out there by herself, carrying the weight of being a parent. He felt guilty all the way through his body. His steps were shaky and slow, and he knelt down in front of the boys. "Hi," he said in a soft voice, not sure how to address them. His voice is usually strong, and he said, "My name is Broad," and they looked at him with blinking eyes. I know," he added awkwardly. They didn't answer. He didn't blame them. How do you talk to a man who suddenly appears in your life claiming nothing but knowing everything? He looked around. "Turn your attention back to the hospital bed where Shanae was lying still." Sickness, but it was still clear that he could see the bride he married in her. He took a deep breath and stood up. He needed to do it now, not later. He needed to talk to the doctor. When he found the ER doctor, he called. He could pull every string, try anything to get the best team. "I don't care." The "no matter what," he begged. "Save her!" His voice cracked, which even he found surprising. Money didn't matter. All of a sudden, only her life and the woman he loved were important. Thrown away like she was nothing was now everything, and the risk of losing. He couldn't stand to see her hurt before he could make things right. Hours went by, and the boys fell asleep. In chairs, and Broad stayed right there to watch over them as they tried to figure things out. He didn't care about anything. His eyes never left the operating room door, the important emails on his phone, but he didn't answer the board members' missed calls for the first time ever. Everything else didn't matter. Only this woman, these boys, and this family were important. Knew he had a nurse finally came out and took off her gloves. "She's stable," she said. "You can see her soon. She asked for her sons." Broad nodded, feeling better but still As he watched her fight to get him, he felt bad that she hadn't asked for him. Why would she, he thought. He'd lost the right. Know that she had become a strong mother who could raise her children. One of the twins was brave enough to build a world without him. Deep inside, not sorrow or guilt alone, but admiration, awe, and he felt a strong urge to fix what he had broken and earn what he had lost. He turned around and saw the twins curled up under a shared blanket like kittens. "I'm not okay," he said. "Your father," he mumbled to himself, almost afraid to believe it. But the truth hit him hard, and that fact would change everything. The hospital hallway was dead quiet. Tension was thick like a blanket, wrapped around Broad's chest as he sat on the edge of the line to wait. He didn't know what was going on as he bowed his head and rested his arms on his knees. How to hold it in his fitted suit was rumpled and forgotten. His phone was off. There is no way to get to the outside world from inside these hospital walls. He was only interested in the truth inside the room where Chennai lay breathing. He had spent his whole life looking for deals and controlling events to get what he wanted. But nothing in his multi-billion-dollar career had ever been like this. For the pain in his heart that was getting worse, because he thought he might have hurt not only a woman he used to care about, but also you missed out on a whole lifetime with two little souls who might have been his kids were walking down the hall. But he didn't move. He just stared at the floor, his eyes hurting and his chest getting tighter by the second. The nurse quietly walked out and gave him a nod. "She's awake," was all she said. But it hit him straight on like lightning, jolting him to his feet and racing his heart. He walked up to the door and hovered his hand over the handle for too long. The man who used to be brave was now paralyzed with fear, because what was waiting behind that door wasn't just a talk, was the moment that would change his whole life, his past, his future, and everything else. He opened the door with a broken breath and walked into the room where time seemed to have stopped. Shanae was lying on the bed. She was pale but awake, and her eyes were tired but still full of that quiet fire that he used to ignore. As soon as they looked at each other, she turned her face away, and the small movement hurt him more than any words could. "Shanae," he started, but his voice was shaky. She was hoarse and didn't say a word. Her hands wriggled around on the edge of the blanket, and the IV in her wrist shook a little. From the stress of, "Who are those boys?" he asked, and the crack in his, "I need to know exactly how they look," the voice said, making the clean room feel too small. "Like me," she said, but she didn't say a word. Her eyes were far away, pleading, "Don't." His voice was low as he stepped closer. "Please lie to me." She didn't look at him. She just looked at the ceiling as if it were more comforting than the guy who had promised to love her forever. "You're right to ask me that now," she said in a sharp, weak voice. He jerked back. He said, "I don't know, but I need to know the truth." There was a long pause, and choked to death. Suddenly the door flew open, and the twins ran in with behind them a nurse. "Mama!" they all called at once, their sweet voices cutting through the air. Shanae gave them a weak smile as they rushed to her bedside and clung to her arms through the heavy air. As they each chose a side, she ran her fingers through their hair as she did so, putting their little heads on her shoulders, and Broad just stared. As the boys looked up at him, he was totally broken, but they were calm. He asked in a voice that was so low it could barely be heard across the room. "Are they mine?" He asked, not out of anger or a sense of entitlement, but with pure openness, a soul that was shaking and thirsty for the truth he was never given. Shanae slowly turned her head to look at him, and for a moment the room went dark. Every heartbeat was louder than thunder, and her eyes shone with unshed. She rubbed her sons' backs with tears in her eyes and a shaking voice. She said in a whisper, "Yes, they are yours." It had been 5 years. "Sons," she said, and the words came out of her mouth like a confession, letting out a quiet blast. That broke down all the walls in Broad's heart. He fell on his hands. He can't catch his breath as his tears hit the tiled floor slowly and quietly. His heart ripped through the cold armor he had made around himself as feelings he didn't understand tore through him. For years, Aiden and Kylo were confused by the stranger's sobs. "Mama, is he crying?" Kylo asked, making Shanette's heart race. She didn't answer. Right away, she reached out and put a gentle hand on Broad's shoulder. The touch made him shiver, and he looked at her. I looked up at her with teary eyes, and there it was. That pain, that sorrow, that he made a silent plea for forgiveness that he didn't earn, but still hoped for. Chennai said softly that he just found out he missed 5 birthdays. The boys didn't get it, but they gravely nodded. Broad reached for their little hands were shaking because they weren't sure if he could touch them, but they did. Not pulling away, Aiden asked, "Are you the man who brought Mama to the Broad?" Nodded and said, "Yes." Kylo said a thank you, and Broad felt something inside him break and then put back together again at the same time. There were billion-dollar deals that couldn't go through, but there was never a simple being thanked by a child meant more than all of that. "I didn't know that," he choked out. She looked at him for the first time and said, "God, Sean, I didn't know." There was no anger, just weariness, sadness, and a softer feeling underneath it all. She said, "You didn't ask." "You left," he answered, guilt of physical weight in across his chest. "I thought you'd be better off without me. And you thought that gave quiet question, 'Do you have the right to disappear?'" He didn't answer. He deserved it. He felt every bit of her pain, but he still reached out and put his hand on her shoulder. "I want to make it right," he said. "I want to know them." We looked at each other for a moment. "I want to know you again. If I say no, I'll still try. I'll still be here." There was more quiet, but this time it wasn't heavy. Was thoughtful, tender, and unsure. The boys got into bed and tucked each other in, with their heads resting on her sides, and Broad watched them as if she were seeing a work of art. Shanae looked down at them and then up at the man who, once, "You can't just walk in and take over a family you didn't help build," she said in a calm but strong voice. But you can earn a spot if you. Broad nodded with tears still on his face and said, I'll try every day. For the first time in 5 years, they were starting out on a weak note. It wasn't about anger or rejection, deception, but about telling the truth, getting better, and a dad finally seeing his kids. Through the lens of regret and the dream of second chances. As the lights went out, the room became quiet, and outside night fell over the city. The sounds of carts going by and soft nurse footsteps are becoming fainter and fainter. Broad stayed inside and sat on the small sofa next to Shanae's bed. His eyes were fixed on the two little boys who were curled up next to their mother like pieces of a puzzle. The puzzle he didn't know he was missing until now. The soft hum of even though there was silence. Broad could hear a roar in his thoughts. More than anything else, because he wasn't worried about tasks or stock prices for the first time in years. He was only thinking about mergers and the cruel kingdom he built. Of Aiden's innocent smile and Kylo's interested eyes, of how Shanette's fingers moved, slept with strands of his song through their hair, telling them how easy love could grow even after so much pain. Leaned forward, his big hands shaking a little as he looked at his kids. Not boys by chance or theory, but real boys with big hearts who had grown up without him and were still alive. They were beautiful and kind in a world he had nothing to do with, but they were so open and gentle, as if some small. Before Shaw told the truth, some of them knew something about him. Broad took a deep breath and slowly stood up, being careful not to scare anyone. Taking a soft step toward the hospital bed, Aiden woke up first, blinking those deep ocean blue eyes that looked just like his own. Then a small smile, as if the stranger who had become a father wasn't scary, but it felt a little too familiar. Broad felt something move in his chest. It was an ache, a pull, and a warm swell of. He knelt next to the bed and felt a feeling that was so strange it made his throat tighten. Aiden reached out a small hand and lightly touched his with his fingers. Electric, not because it shocked him, but because it broke everything he thought he knew about Kylo. Woke up next, blinking and with sleepy eyes. When he saw Broad, he put his little fingers on Broad's wrist and felt it like a child looking at something new and interesting. He took a deep breath, froze, and then bowed his head, letting a tear fall as he did so. And he put his big hand on both of theirs. He was amazed that something so small could mean so much. Broad felt something crash into him like a huge wave at that very moment, when there was nothing else going on. Raw. The kind that didn't wait to be understood or ask for permission to come in and make itself at home. The part of your heart that wants to be heard and wants things to change. Would you like me to read you something? He asked softly, not sure if the words were even right. Still made sense to them, but they needed to do more than just feel Aiden. Kylo slowly nodded, his eyelids drooping again, but it was clear he liked the action. As he curled up against Chennai's side, Broad stood up and looked around the room for a children's book that the nurse had brought in earlier. He moved a chair closer and opened the book with shaking hands, but not because he was crazy. He wasn't able to read because he wasn't taught how to be soft. Still, he read out loud, his voice calm and low, and he went over some of the silly words, names and over-the-top lines. But the boys laughed sleepily and Broad smiled. Shanae, honestly, most likely for the first time in years, without force or calculation. She slowly opened her eyes and watched from the corner of her bed as her heart was torn between the pain of what she had lost and the joy of what she had gained. She read about the slow-moving miracle of what was growing right in front of her. Page after page until both boys fell asleep again, their breaths slow and steady. Their little fingers were still on his wrist, as if they needed that link even in their dreams. It was late at night. Broad stood up again, quietly walked over to the side table, and took the food tray out. He carefully opened the gifts that the nurse had brought earlier, even though he wasn't sure what the twins would like. Thought they'd like the soft bread rolls and mashed potatoes, the folding tray next to the bed, and put down 2 paper napkins like he remembered something his mother did with him as a child that he hadn't thought about in decades. He wasn't not trying to impress anyone. It wasn't anything big or showy. He was just trying to learn. Wanting, and that humble act made him feel even better, as if what the building blocks of the icy wall around his feelings were melting away one by one. He looked back at Sheeny, whose tired eyes were still watching. He was shocked, and she whispered, her voice rough from being tired. You Broad turned the chair around, moved it closer to her bed, and sat down. He said in a low voice, I didn't want to leave. She didn't answer, but this time her eyes stayed on him longer. She wasn't forgetting or forgiving him, but he leaned forward, his arms on his knees, and looked between the three of them at the woman who she once put her heart in his hands, and the two boys now held his without even trying. The hours went by slowly, but Broad was still when the boys woke up again in the early morning light. They had their shoes on one hand and their juice boxes in the other. He was ready to help, serve, and become something he never thought he could be. Father, not just in name, but also in action and love. He helped Aiden tie his shoes. His shoelaces were hard to tie at first, but Kylo laughed with him when the loops kept coming undone. Before jumping into Broad's lap without notice, he froze for a second, not sure what to do, until he instinctively put his arms around the boy and held him close to his chest. It wasn't clean or perfect, but it was real. It was everything. Broad could see things more clearly when the soft gold light of the morning sun filled the room. Settle over him a calm resolve that this was the start of his life. He had no idea he could build. He had no idea what the next day would bring or how he would get there. There were still many barriers between him and Sean's mercy, but he was sure he would get past them all. Each and every one, if it meant being a dad to Aiden and Kylo. Not just for a day not for a week or a month, but for all time. The morning light leaked through As the nurse stood there, the hospital windows cast a golden color on the clean white walls. Cheney's V was softly adjusted one last time, and she told them she would be Broad, stood to the side with his arms crossed and his mind jumbled. As he saw Cheney slowly grab the boys' jackets and pat them on the heads, saying in a soft voice, he had been quiet all morning, not because he was proud or distant, but because his heart was too full and unsure. Trying to figure out the best time to say what was killing him, Cheney went to the bathroom to change clothes before leaving the hospital after hours. Broad knelt next to the twins and brushed crumbs off their laps. Aiden was happy to show him a crayon drawing he had made on the nurse's notepad. He smiled softly as he did so, with a heart drawn around them and their hands together in the sun. Is that me? Aiden smiled, nodded, and pointed to the bigger figure. Broad asked voice. This is Kylo and me, and Mom is in the middle. You're the one on the Broad's chest hurt again, when he was put next to them instead of between them. Broad came back dressed in clean jeans and a warm sweater that looked like it had been worn too many winters. Finally stood up, took a careful step closer, and said, no, without being angry. Come home with me, he asked softly, with pride in his voice. Cheney stopped moving. She immediately wrapped her arms around herself tighter, her brows furrowed in confusion. What? She asked, even though Broad heard it right and tried again slowly, as if each word hurt him. Something deep. You and the boys should come home with me. My house is big, warm, and safe. You shouldn't have to go back to that place in that state. Cheney's face darkened. We're fine without it. After 5 years, you can't come back, Broad. We've been fine the whole time, and act like we need your house to stay alive. Her voice wasn't very loud, but the pain in it was as sharp as a scream. Broad did not flinch. He took it all in, every word in anger because she had the right to say it. He had been missing and mean, and he didn't have a mansion or a lot of money. Could take away her loneliness or the weight she carried by herself, but this wasn't about shame. It was about change. He took a slow, step-forward step. I'm not a CEO, but her hand eyes looked like those of a man whose soul had been shook awake. I want you to forgive me or even accept me right now. Please let me. Rest easy, boys. Make them feel safe. Let them run through halls that won't close, creak or leak when it rains. If you don't want me around, give them that much. Cheney looked at them and said, I'll sleep in the guest house, but just come home with me for them. She looked into his eyes and saw for once no sharp edges. She saw only a quiet plea and pain, hadn't seen in him since the days before the storm. She looked over at the twins who were starting to pack their little ones. Backpacks with excitement, not realizing how heavy the talk was, but knowing that adventure. They smiled at her and looked at Kylo, asking, Hey mama, can we see daddy's house? She could not say no. Her resistance was shaking. Could take them back to the small apartment with the broken heater and leaky roof. But the picture of them laughing and reading bedtime stories under the stars in a big yard where you don't have to worry about getting cold. The safe balcony made her sigh with a pain that came from years of heartache. Lastly agreed. Just for the boys, she said in a low voice. Broad doesn't say anything. He just nods back, happy not to win but to start. It was quiet but not cold on the way to the house. Aiden put his head on Shanae's shoulder and Kylo pressed his head against his. Nose to the opaque window, eyes wide with awe as trees gave way to iron that was being wound. Gates and tall bushes. Broad got out of the black car first when it stopped rolling and let Shanae in, offering his hand. She thought about it for a second, then agreed to let him help her while the twins played behind the house. Stood tall with clean white walls, beautiful columns, big windows with sheer clothes that moved in the wind, amazed the boys as they stood on the marble steps. Aiden whispered, Whoa! As he spun in place. The room was warm and soft. There were lights on, the floors were shiny, and the smell of vanilla was still in the air. An older maid met them and gasped when she saw Shanae. She tried to hug her right away, calling her Miss. Shanae, I didn't know. Oh, dear child, she whispered in a sad voice. Shanae smiled. Broad stood a narrow distance from her and smiled, remembering the woman from years ago. A few feet back, Shanae took the lead as the twins started to play and giggle. They peeked into rooms and found secret spots. Aiden opened a cabinet door and took out a picture album full of dust. What is this? He asked Shanae, who moved closer and gently took the album from him. Opened it up. The first picture was of her in a white dress, looking up at Broad. She cried, and the next girl held her hand at the altar. The boys were there. Puzzled and interested, Kylo squinted and asked, Is that Mommy? Aiden asked, Is that him? Daddy? Jeanette's breath stopped. She looked at Broad, whose eyes were still. He was asked if she could speak, but she didn't need him to answer. She put her hand on each boy's shoulder and said, Yes, that's yours. Daddy. The room was quiet. The boys slowly turned to face Broad. He waited, scared too. Then, like a dam breaking, both boys ran at him with their tiny arms around him, put their faces into his chest and wrapped their arms around his legs and hips. Daddy, Aiden said, yelled with joy, Our real dad. Kylo repeated Broad and fell to his knees. Again he wrapped his arms around both of them, his heart pounding in his chest. Didn't deserve it, but they gave it to her anyway. Shanae stood there quietly. A tear ran down her face as she watched the scene play out. It wasn't from regret, but from a feeling she hadn't had in years. Hope the light of morning came in. A soft light came in through the windows of the Grand Hartley house and lit up the room where Shanae had woken up that morning. Broadheart was not the cold, distant millionaire who had treated her so badly in the past. He was no longer that person. What it used to be. Something had changed. It was like an overnight flip of a switch, and Broad wasn't just a different person. He was a whole new version of himself. His change began in the strangest way. His heart, which used to be wrapped in something stronger than anything he had ever seen, was slowly melting the ice. Shanae was used to the way the house rang with silence because she had experienced love and the sound of her own footsteps now and then. But this morning there was a change in the air. The smell of bacon cooking filled the kitchen, which was a surprise. The strong smell of freshly brewed coffee hit her as she stood in the hallway. Broad was standing at the stove flipping pancakes with a skilled hand when she felt a sudden flip in her chest. When his sleeves were rolled up, she saw his strong wrists in a way she had never seen them before. He seemed so far away and impossible to reach, but he was cooking food for her and the boys. He said, "Good morning," but didn't look up. His voice was softer than it had ever been. Shanae stood there for a moment. She was shocked and didn't know what to say. She had spent so many years getting used to his ways. It was so cold without him that this sudden warmth was strange. Was it real? Was this just a brief moment? Or had he really changed? I didn't expect you to be. She was able to keep the shock out of her voice while she talked about being up this early. I should get used to hearing you in the morning, Broad said, flipping a pancake with great care. I want to be a part of your world. What makes you smile? What makes you happy? It made Shanae's heart skip a beat. She didn't know what to say. For years, not sure if he would ever change or see her for the woman she really was. Not just his mother, children besides the woman who suffered in silence in his shadow, and now he's here. I made her food and tried to understand her. It was almost too good to be honest, Mom. The boys ran into the kitchen, full of energy. Look, Dad made breakfast, she said with a soft smile. Her chest felt warm. Broad really smiled when he said, I see that. That looks delicious. He looked at the boys with fresh tenderness, and his eyes lit up. You want to? He asked his oldest son, Liam. Can you help me with the eggs? His voice was full of love. Broad carefully gave Liam in as he happily nodded and walked toward the stove. With a spoon to help him through the process, Shanae watched with wide eyes. It wasn't the man she had married. It wasn't the man who had once shut her eyes. She felt emotionally cut off from the man who had grown apart from the family he had built. This was someone else, compassionate and more aware of what other people need. Broad-heartedly was Shanae saw the world change right in front of her eyes and felt the hope was beginning to grow. After breakfast, the house was full of laughter and happiness as Broad joined the boys playing their favorite game, hide and seek. It wasn't a fancy balls or something. Broad was used to putting on events. There were no business deals or talks, fancy parties. It was a simple game played outside in the sun. The sun was shining on their small family, and Shanae saw her husband for the first time. She was really interested in their lives and stood by the window to watch them play Broad. The man who seemed so cold at first was now laughing and chasing the boys around the yard. His face was warm, seeing someone she hadn't seen in years. He seemed to feel lighter, and he was finally letting go. He was ready to enjoy the happiness that came with having a family. Nothing less than amazing. Later that night, when the boys were getting ready for bed, Broad approached Shane with a serious look on his face. He took a deep breath and then spoke. Shane, I need to say sorry to you in a low voice. She looked at him and said, it made her heart skip a beat. For what? His answer was soft. For everything. The intensity of his look meeting hers took her breath away. For the years I spent cutting you off, for the times I made you feel like you weren't seen. I was wrong to treat you the way I should have, Shanae thought. It had been a long time coming, and now that it was finally here, Broad didn't know how to deal with her guilt. I've been blind, Shanae, he said, and the sorrow in his eyes was clear. He kept moving closer to her and said, I didn't know what I had until it was almost too late. But now I see you. I see everything. The love you've shown me, the things you've given up for me, and I want to spend the rest of my life earning your love again because of what a wonderful woman you are. Her throat got tight. The weight of his words made her feel sad, and her chest tightened. He told her she could believe that this wasn't just a brief moment of change, but something real. Real, long-lasting love. But she wasn't sure. After all, this was the same her for years, the man who had turned his back on their marriage and their children. How could she trust him? Make sure that this change was real. I'm not asking for your pardon right away, Broad said. She heard a voice say, I know I don't deserve it, but I want to show you that I can be the man. You deserve it, and I want to be the husband and dad this family needs. Shanae had tears in the corners of her eyes. She had never thought that would happen. It broke her heart that the guy who had been emotionally unavailable for a long time would come to her with such being open and honest. She never thought he'd say those things or show this much commitment. I'm not sure if I can just forgive you, she said in a soft voice, her feelings shaking. It will take time, for I need to get better before I can trust you again, Broad said in a deep voice. As I feel it, I'm not asking for it right now. All I want is a chance to show you that I can be better and love you the way you've always deserved, Shanae said. The weight of his words hurt her heart. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was for sure. Broad Hartley was not the same man she had married. He had changed. Feeling bad about what they did and ready to do anything to win her love and trust in bed that night, Shane turned to him with her hand on his chest. Broad wrapped his arm around her and pulled her close. It was the first time in years that she felt his warm touch, without any doubt or fear. He wasn't perfect, he was still learning. She had always hoped that he would become the man she saw lying next to her. "I'll give you a chance. But you have to show me that, Broad," she whispered in a voice that was hard to hear. "You have to show me every day that you're the man I can trust again." "I will," he said in a whisper. He said in a low, honest voice, "Every day, let me earn your love again." He was believed by Chennai for the first time in a long time. She knew it would happen. It will take some time, but this could be the start of something new, something beautiful that could help them heal from the hurts of the past and build a bright future full of. When she closed her eyes and leaned against him, she felt love, passion, and unwavering loyalty. Shanae let herself fall asleep quickly. For the first time in years, her heart felt full of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready for it as long as Broad was with her. Every day she proved that he deserved her heart. The next few days were full of big changes. Broad's change didn't happen in an instant. It happened over a long period of time. As a man, a husband, and a dad. Every day he learned something new, something different about Shanae's favorite little habits, the things that made her smile and the things that made her sad. He became more involved with her life than ever. It seemed like every day his heart was getting softer. He wasn't just saying sorry for the mistakes he had made in the past. He was working hard to become someone who could be trusted again, be the partner she had always wanted. One night after the kids went to bed, the house was full of there was a sudden silence that seemed to hold the promise of something important. Shanae didn't know what to expect, but she had learned that Broad was always interesting over the past few weeks. But what she hadn't seen coming was the big move he had been planning. A move that would change the course of their relationship forever. It was a quiet night like these that often made Shanae think about the progress they had made as a few and as a family. The house was quiet. She had just seen the soft glow of the lamps, which made the room feel warm and welcoming. She had just finished her normal evening routine of cleaning up, checking on the kids, and getting ready for bed when she felt drawn. Brought me to the kitchen by the smell of something tasty. The normal buzz of activity in there was a soothing calm in the house, as if the world outside had stopped. For a moment when she walked into the dining room, she stopped dead in her tracks. She couldn't catch her breath because the whole room had changed. The daily space looked like it was from a dream now that the table was set. And a bunch of fresh roses on top of fine plates in sparkling crystal glasses, I was sitting in the middle. The soft flicker of candles made the room look lovely. She saw moving shadows on the walls of the room, but what really struck her was Broad stood there in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his normally messy hair in a ponytail. With his hair neatly combed back, he looked serious but full of hope. "Shanaz." She could barely hear herself whisper because of the sudden rush of feelings in her chest. Her heart started to beat fast as she took in the sight of him. He looked so different and changed, but also so familiar. There was something weak about his posture and unsure in his eyes that made her heart beat faster. Broad said in a soft voice, "I haven't seen him like this in years, maybe ever." Lugging a weight that made her shiver, "I've been thinking a lot about us and what I did showed how much you meant to me. And I saw that the guy I used to, I no longer want to be that person. You've shown me a side of life I didn't know existed, and I want to give you my all, something that shows how much you've changed me." Shanae's heart beat faster. As she waited, she could feel a lump growing in her throat because she didn't know what he meant. The room felt charged with the expectation, and stillness of the moment only made the feeling stronger. Shanae Broad said again, his voice heavy with feeling, "I've changed. Not for you, but for someone else. You've helped me see what really counts and what real love is. I finally understand what it means to truly love someone again after a long time. To be present, I don't feel safe enough to put everything I have into building something real with you. Want to be your husband, but I also want to be the man who deserves to stand out. Beside you, to be the man you've always needed and the man you deserve," Shanae said. He told her something heavy on her chest, and she couldn't find the words for a moment. The truth in his eyes and the love he was giving her were too much for her to handle. This was the man she had always hoped for and dreamed of. The man she had never given up on, even after years of heartache. Broad dropped to one knee out of the blue. Time seemed to slow down as her heart pounded in her chest and her eyes went wide with shock. She hadn't seen this coming. Not in a million years. The room felt even stranger, like she was in a dream that wasn't sure what was real anymore, because it was stuck between the past and the future. "Shanae, will you marry me again?" Broad's voice was steady but full of feeling. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with hope and a strong desire to make things right. "Will you give me the chance?" she asked. "Will you let me spend the rest of my life winning your love to show you that I'm the man you deserve?" The words hung in the air for a while. "I promise you every day that I deserve you." Everything stopped for a moment. Shanae's heart shook, and the gates that had been shut on her flowed open. For so long, finally broke. Tears filled her eyes and ran down her face. Cheeks. The man who used to be cold, distant, and needy mentally was now getting down on one knee in front of her and asking her to trust him again. Aiden and Kylo ran into the room as she stood there still. They were very excited, and Aiden had a small satin box in his hand. Kylo was right behind him, jumping with joy. "Mommy, say yes!" they all said at the same time. Shanae's sounds were so full of pure happiness and hope that she could no longer hold it in. Tears flowed easily, not because they were sad, but because they were filled with love. She looked down at Broad with a softened gaze, her heart full of joy, and could tell by the look in his eyes that this wasn't just an idea, it was a plea. He made a promise to be everything he wanted to be for her. She slowly nodded. She couldn't even raise her voice enough to whisper, "Yes, I will." She spoke the words, and her heart swelled with feeling. She reached down and took the ring from Aiden's hands, sparkled in the soft light, just like the hope that was now burning between them. Broad stood up, his eyes bright. With joy, he took her hand and carefully put the ring on her finger. It fit. It looked just right, like it was meant to be there the whole time. At that moment, it was more than just a sign of their past or future. It was a sign of everything they had been through, everything they had built together, and everything they still had to find. Broad. He grabbed her by the arms, held her close, and whispered, "I love you. Chennai, I will show you how much I love you for the rest of my life." She closed her eyes and let the warmth of his hug and the love that came from him wrap around her. She was at peace for the first time in a long time, as if all the pain and sadness of the past had gone away. Something new and real took its place. "I love you too," she said, back in a voice that broke with emotion. "And I believe in us. I believe." In that moment, with the soft glow of candlelight and by hearing their kids laugh happily, Shanae knew that this was the start of a new era for their family. Their hearts were full of love, excitement, and the hope that this time they would build something together. The morning after the proposal, it seemed like a dream, but as Shanae looked at him, he realized it was real. When she looked at her engagement ring again, she felt a huge sense of peace. Once everything was back to normal, Broad's change wasn't just a momentary act of love. It was the start of a new chapter that would not be shaped by the past, but by the future they were about to face. Build together. The wedding day was coming up quickly, and this time it felt like everything was different. A different Broad had demanded that their second wedding would be small and quiet, just the two of them, that would hold all the weight of what they had been through and what they were about to go through. Be no big hall, no guests, and no other things to do. Just them and their love. Broad woke up early on the day of the wedding. He had taken over the kitchen and was making breakfast for the first time, had thought of everything that would happen on their special day. Shanae could tell by the way his hands shook just slightly as he made their food. It was a new side of him that she had never seen before. Seen before, his actions weren't just nice. They were well thought out and on purpose, and filled with love. As he fixed her veil, his touch was soft, and the way he smiled at her was different from any other smile he had ever given her. It was warm and longing, and hope. The service was simple but lovely. Shani wore a soft broad, wore a long, flowy white dress that she had always wanted to wear, but never really thought she would. He looked at her with eyes so intense that they made her heart race. His tuxedo fit him perfectly, but the way he looked at her made the room feel full, even though it wasn't. Made her feel 1,000 different things. Every look told her how much he wanted her to trust him less now than before. There were no big surprises. There were no grand speeches or promises made in front of hundreds of people. They whispered vows to each other that felt like a fresh start for their souls. This time, it wasn't about the stress of having to please other people. It was about them and what they wanted to do. They told each other about the love they had fought for and the plans they had for the future. Didn't know was possible until Broad told her, "I promise to love you. With all my heart to love you, hold you, and make you feel like you deserve every moment we spend together," Shanae said. The words were so real that they made her heart feel like it might burst. Real and open, and when she answered, her voice shook with hers. Tears. "I will love you deeply always. I will trust you even in the worst of times. I believe in you 1,000 times." It seemed like the most important promise she could make. Broad led her out of the small chapel they had rented for the service after they were married. The setting sun cast there was a golden glow over the scene. At that moment, it felt like everything was coming together as if the world had aligned to bring them back together. There was no need for a hurry or a big party. They were both excited to be with each other and start the life they had always dreamed of. Night fell, and it was quiet. Their second wedding was still very close, and not just during the service. The promises, but in the space they shared now, their love had grown even stronger, what they had always dreamed of. And the wedding night they never had, the one they had been missing for years, was their chance to get back what they had lost. Their bedroom was dimly lit with soft candlelight. The room had a lovely glow, and the bed was covered in rose petals. Broad had he spread them out himself, putting each flower down with care and love. The soft smell of Broad's cologne mixed with the roses to fill the room, and the candle's warm glow that lingered in the air. The night felt personal, like the world had stopped. As Shanae stood by the door, Broad stood at the door and watched her. Bed, her hands twitching as she moved the hem of her dress. She could feel his eyes on her, sweet and soft, full of love and desire, on her. This time it was different. It wasn't about cold looks or forced love. It was about a strong desire to be together. Link about two souls finally getting back together after a long, painful split. Shanae Broad whispered, "I want to make this right." His voice was full of raw feeling, like she had never heard from him before. "I want to tell you how much I love you. You are my world, and I need you. That you know that every part of you." Chen's heart raced as she looked at. When she looked into his eyes, she could feel her breath catch in her throat. The way he approached her showed that he was open and vulnerable. This wasn't just about physical closeness. It was about healing, about getting back together with her in a way that felt real and pure. Broad took a step toward his hands, touched her face softly, and his thumb wiped away a tear. That had run down her cheek. His eyes relaxed, and he wouldn't say another word. Placed the softest kiss on her forehead, with his lips pressed against hers. He kissed her slowly and softly as a sign of love that spoke volumes, trying to remember how her skin felt, how she smelled, and how she shook beneath his touch. As they made their way to bed, Broad led Shanae gently, down her body, never taking his hands off of hers. His touch was slow and deliberate with each caress, was purposeful, as if every touch were an explanation, a way to make things right, a promise. Sat down and kissed her on the neck and shoulders, places that had been scarred by time and memories. She didn't want to hide those scars this time. They were a part of her. Broad kissed all of them as if they were signs of their trip. "Everything about you is beautiful," he said in a whisper between kisses. Tears came to Chennai's eyes as she said, "Every inch of you is worth loving." Closed them, stunned by how softly he touched her. Her body didn't react to him with the stress of the past, but with trust in her heart, she reached up and shook her hands. She touched his face a little, remembering how he felt. He was the man who had seemed so far away before, but now it seemed so close. The night was full of the soft. They loved each other so much that their quiet murmurs spoke louder than words. There was no rush or sense of hurry. They took their time to enjoy how close they were and how their hearts beat. In sync, every moment seemed to show the path they had taken together. They held on tight as they went on a journey of love, forgiveness, and second chances. They were so close that it seemed like they could never get enough, Broad whispered. Shanae's ear, his words were so soft and sweet that she could hardly hold them. I love you forever, he whispered. You are mine, Shanae, and I will. Shanae kissed him softly on the hands. I will love you as long as I live. She ran her fingers through his hair and held on to him as if she never wanted to let go. I love you, Broad. I always have. As they lay there together in the rose petals, their bodies were twisted in a more than love, and they knew that their journey was just getting started. It was the night they had missed. All things they had dreamed of all those years ago had finally come true. The days after their wedding were even better. Even though they felt like dreams, Broad and Sean had finally found each other. Their long-sought peace and happiness. Their love, which had been weak and unsure at first, had grown into something impossible to break, something that was built on trust and shared experiences, understanding, and real love. Every morning started with Broad. Getting up early, he ran his hands over Shanae's face softly as she woke up in her sleep. She would smile softly and open her eyes as they were no longer tense when she saw him next to her. There were no more cold silences between them. There was only love and warmth. Their hearts seemed to glow with love. The love they had fought for had become the basis of their lives. Together, Broad had completely changed the character of the cruel millionaire. That used to define him were almost gone. He wasn't the same man who would make choices without thinking twice and never think about what would happen if they did what they did. Now he was the man who promised Shane and their kids every day that he would be better for the life they were making together. He loved every part of their family's day and thought deeply about although the time Broad spent with them may have changed the way he treated Chennai, that wasn't the only way he changed. He became a better father, which was the biggest change in his life. Aiden and Kylo, his two boys, had been his everything since they were born. But he was now more involved in their lives in a deeper way. Used to love them from afar, but now he loved them from close up. He gave them everything he had to make sure they felt safe, loved, and looked for. Broad used to get the boys ready for school every morning and make sure they ate food. He no longer had he'd say he was too busy for the little things, so he'd get down on his knees and brush their hair, faces, or helping them put on their clothes. The boys would laugh and squeal with joy in the mornings. Tell him about your plans for the day, and Broad will listen and ask you questions about the boys' school life, their friends, and their hopes and dreams. Had become stronger than he ever thought possible. Kylo, did you finish your homework? Broad would ask in a soft voice and encouraging, Not yet, Daddy. Kylo would answer with wide eyes that sparkled with mischief. Then let's do it together when we get home, Broadwood would say, ruffling his hair. Shanae would smile as she watched them and touch her son's hair as a sign of love. She was so proud of Broad that she never thought she'd see this side of him. Once too far away to really understand how important family was, the man was. Now he was the dad she had always wanted for her kids. The change wasn't just it was for their family, not just her, and Broad loved his family very much. He always made sure Shanae knew how much he loved her at night after the kids went to bed. After putting the boys to bed and making the house quiet, Shanae would find herself in Broad's arms. He would say, I love you, Shanae, while whispering it in her ear. Still very emotional. I love you more than I ever thought possible. I'm sorry for the person I used to be. I'll spend the rest of my life making up with you, but know this. You are my. She would close her eyes and let the truth of his words wash over her. In these quiet times when the outside world went away and she realized it was just the two of them. Broad's change was good for them and their family. He wasn't perfect. She had always been the strong one, but he was right for her. Thought people were good even when it didn't seem possible. But with Broad, it had tipped the scales in his favor. He had fought for her love because of their boys, and now he was fighting for. In the evening, when the boys were asleep and the house was quiet, Shanae and Broad sat on the couch. When their fingers were together, the quiet was nice, and the warmth between them was perfect. It was clear that they were in love. Shanae took a deep breath and smiled at him. "Bro, I've always believed in you," she said quietly, her voice full. "With love and pride, I can see that you've changed into the man I knew. You could be. I'm so proud of you. You're a great dad and a great husband. Mostly, you're my partner and equal," Broad said with soft eyes. His heart was racing as he squeezed her hand and leaned forward to kiss her. By the face. "I'm nothing without you," he told her simply. "I couldn't have found myself without you, Shanae. You've shown me the way. I'll never forget that you showed me what real love is." They stayed there for a while, enjoying the warmth of their love for each other. Their love had been built on hard times, but it stood strong now. Without giving up, Sean opened a small business, a bakery, that she had always wanted to do. Broad helped her every step of the way, from helping her plan the shop to making sure it opened on time. Besides being her husband, he was also her business partner, her friend, and the person who helped her run the business. He was her biggest fan and asked her every night how things were going, truly interested in every detail of her day. "How's the new cake recipe going? Is everything going well?" Broad would ask, his eyes shining with interest. Shanae would say with a bigger smile, "I think it'll be a hit. You should give it a try." Broad would laugh later, and the sound would be warm and real. "I can't wait. Maybe I'll even one of these days to help you out in the kitchen." They laughed together, and the simple joy filled their home with warmth. The times they spent together, whether they were cooking or just chatting about their days, became a steady source of being happy. Shanae's business was doing well, and she could run it with the help of the man she loved. Had been too caught up in his own thoughts to notice her dreams at one point. Thoughts of love and promises to always be there filled the nights. Being there for each other, Broad never stopped telling Shanae how much he loved her and was thankful for her. He had to have her by his side. Every day he worked hard to show her that. His love wasn't just words, it was clear in everything he did and said. Being in their lives. The family they had together wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. They had built a life together based on love, not blood. Nothing could have broken their link. Broad, the rich man who used to be mean, had become a loving husband, father, and he had always been able to be a good partner, and Shawnee was the woman he had. She had found the love she had always dreamed of and believed in him when no one else did. It was a story of second chances in the end of their love story. Broad had finally found a way to learn from the past and grow as a family. She had found peace in her life, and he had found his place in theirs. Love holds a family together that can't be broken.